Max Gaw, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. 5 weeks left to go in your fantasy footy season. Depending on how your year is going, it may just mean you're 1 week away from your league finals, if that's what you care about, or in rankings. You now have a real good, not just idea of where you sit, but where you sit in alignment to the rest of the top 100 and the moves you may or may not need to make to get yourself in contention. Plenty to get through, and we'll talk about it in a moment. Joining me on this episode, I've got Kane. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, MJ. Very well. It's nice to do it after teams, and it's an important week, it seems, to have done the podcast after the teams came out, because we've got a bit of news.
We've got a fair bit of news. Something we're going to do for you as we head to these final few rounds is just delay the episodes a little bit later in the week to be able to make sure that when we deliver you your podcast episodes, they're the most insightful and helpful pieces of content we can bring your way. The biggest piece of news that's come out of teams. Now, we've known some issues that have come this week. Josh Kelly owners, and we'll talk about him in a moment, have known they've got an issue with him with concussion, missing this week. There's other players I want to get to, but the big name, Kane, George Hewett. Back soreness, which is always a difficult injury to feel confident in terms of where he's at in the competition. The vast majority of coaches, especially coaches that have had good years, own him. In Supercoach, he's priced at $536,100. 58% of the competition own him. He's averaging 111 over the year, but he is seeing a bit of a regression in the last 5, going at just 102. I know just 102 is really weird to say, but he hasn't been quite to the peak of what we saw at the start of the year. AFL Fantasy, that's the format I want to spend some time talking about. There's less how many trades are left conversations have you got to have there, but 766K, 43% of the competition own him, an average 98 over the year. But again, just a small regression going at 92 over the past 5, no tons in that stretch of time. And DT, same sort of averages as what we've seen through there, but at 766K through there. Let's spend our time on that. AFL Fantasy, we could probably give the most amount of time because two trades a week, use it or lose it. Teams are mostly completed. And what I mean mostly is Darcy Cameron might still be there. Nick Dacos might still be there. But on current form, no real rush. Maybe for Cameron there is. So if you're a George Hewett owner, Kane, what do we do?
It's definitely a trade, MJ, as a starting point. And this is when it gets team by team, because some people might be limited to it having to be a defender. Some people might have Harry Himmelberg in the forward line and be able to swing him back and open up the forward line, which is probably where I'd prefer to be shopping at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's a lot of options in the forward line that are tempting.
Yes.
In the back line, though, which is where the bulk of the people listening to this podcast will have to make a decision, it's actually quite tough. You know, if you don't have Doherty and Sinclair, you're paying big bucks, but they're the two you want. I think if you already have those two, now it gets a little bit trickier. You know, Tom Stewart would be top of the list,
but
nearly on par
away.
with, but he's a week away. He'd nearly be on par with, you'd probably have Doherty and Sinclair right up the top, small gap to Stewart. I think beyond that, there is a bit of a big gap. I know Nick Dacos has been unbelievable.
Of course, but you're not trading into him now, surely not.
No, I wouldn't think so, MJ. And we know what happens when you get a massive pump up in the media. You come up against a team like Essendon that has some players that, have done defensive roles in recent weeks in the midfield.
Yep.
I think Guelphy is the one that people have flagged. Good runner, provided a lot of pressure on the weekend. He maybe gets that role. Yeah, again, Dacos takes the kick-ins and a few other things that sort of filled in a bit of a flaw.
Yeah, you're not nervous if you're an owner. I just don't think you can trade into him.
Correct. But you look at that tier below and it's a really, really tough group. I know we tried to answer a few weeks ago who are some of these guys that you could get on. And it's a weird group. We spoke about an Isaac Cumming. We spoke about an Andy Brayshaw. Oh, sorry, Angus Brayshaw. We spoke about a Bailey Dale. We spoke about a few of these guys, and really, none of them have really set the world on fire. Some for different reasons. Isaac Cumming had a quiet game. Bailey Dale had a tagged game. Angus Brayshaw played Port last week, who loved to hold onto the ball. They haven't really set the world on fire, and it's probably drawn off a lot of attention this week to a guy like Mason Redmond.
Yeah,
when you come off the big score, everyone's eyeballs go, okay, what's going on here? Let me have a look into the numbers a little bit more. And the more you look, the more I can't help but be impressed, MJ. He was a guy that, I hadn't really given much credence to seriously considering. You have a look at the numbers, but you sort of think, no, I'd rather this guy. I'd rather a Stewart a few weeks ago. I'd rather a Sinclair. I think a lot of people starting squad-wise, had Hewett, had Short, had Sicily.
Chris,
they had a Whitfield in there. Chris,
guys.
like there was a few guys like that, and you sort of just, overlook him, really, don't you? You just overlook him. He's doing his thing. He pops a good score. You write it off. Comes back with some really solid scores in the 80s, and he's popped another score. So it's hard to have a defender that has a ceiling above 120, and he's got.
Well, they're just not
he's got
there.
3 of those already,
including, like you said, that really big one that's come through there. There's a player we'll come back to in a moment. There's still some more I want to get your input on, Dawson. There is a glaring omission as people listen to you talk in this episode. They go, you didn't mention Jordan Dawson. And I'm going to let you go him in a minute about that's intentional that you've opted out on missing him. So I want to get your take. But Mason Redmond, I really like as an AFL fantasy play. And again, we're just purely addressing AFL fantasy at the moment. We will, dream teamers and super coaches will come to you with the Hewett dilemma in a moment. But there's a couple of reasons why I like Redmond. In one is if you are a Hewett owner, it does pocket you not really any cash, but it doesn't, because it costs you money to jump up to it. But it's not something that within the rest of your team, that unless you've got other issues to deal with, that should be something too far to get away from. So in terms of attainable players, tick the box. In terms of unique, it might not be this way in 24 hours, but right now, Mason Redmond is in 1.1% of AFL fantasy teams. Tick. He comes up with a break even, again, purely just in AFL fantasy, of 73. So even if he does those couple of 80s, let's say he goes 100 over the next fortnight. We're talking, okay, he's up at 820. What I like about him then, while I'm still on him, he's got a matchup against Collingwood. Beautiful matchup in terms of they're not really a scary team through that forward line. It's their midfield and their defensive work around the ground that sets them up for success. And then lastly, I like, as you mentioned, the ceiling, they play at the MCG this Sunday afternoon. Beautiful, sunny, top of 18 degrees in Melbourne. And that's a great 1 week. The very next week, North Melbourne. However, if you're in the luxury position, and it's a guy you mentioned his name, and I'm keen to get on your take on this. If you get stuck with him for 2 weeks, North Melbourne, it's fine. But the very next week after this Collingwood matchup, if he can pop you a ton, it's basically a sideways trade to one Tom Stewart.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, MJ. I think that's the dilemma that some coaches will have this week, is they might have that position where they don't have a Josh Kelly, which is the other name that, as you said, we knew was out as soon as the post game last week when his coach said he'd miss. So I think when you've got Hewett and you've got Kelly, you're probably shopping one defender, one mid.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've avoided Kelly, because I don't think many teams would have avoided Hewett, that's just how popular he is.
Listen to the podcast. Chances are you've...
Yeah, it's quite rare. He's going to be someone you've got to address. So then it gets really interesting. Do you address the Darcy Cameron issue? Grundy's not coming back this week.
Yep.
There's not even a VFL game for him to have a run in. So for me, I don't think it would matter too much if they won or lost, but I think a win would give you maybe, okay, have
Small
another
breath.
run in the VFL.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, what Collingwood's doing is working right now.
Mm-hmm.
They're just winning. So that's a ticking time bomb to a degree. Now,
Yep.
will it have the same disparity in performance that he had at the start of the year with Grundy? It's probably somewhere in between. We know
Sure.
they've spoken about Grundy playing more forward. Cameron's obviously proven himself, got a bit of confidence. But I think we've all seen that Cameron is starting to tire a little bit. The weekend was great. He kicked some great goals. Tackling was back a bit, but it was that sort of game. He did
It was
a
a
good
wet
job.
weather game, wasn't it?
Yeah. The one for me, though, and the reason I did leave him out is we've got not many games to go now, MJ. That's
4
what's
after this week.
It's only 5 games to go. Now, that is nothing. And what I mean by that is if you can just have one poor score, if you think about, if you have a 60, if you have a tag game, a 60,
Yeah.
to get back to 100, it's 110, 110, 110, 110.
That's a
just to get to
decent
100. So, Jordan Dawson.
Yeah.
Now, the first alarm bell was evident weeks ago. And it was
Yes.
Sydney, his old team, and it was Ryan Clark.
Starting to tag.
Who's been gobbling up halfbacks.
Mm.
He's gobbled up Sinclair. He's gobbled up Clark last week. He's gobbled up Bailey Dale. So he's got some good scalps when he plays, and he plays that role. Doesn't seem to be going to the midfielders. He's leaving that to the row bottoms and the Mills just to do their thing. He's going to these halfbacks. And if you've watched Adelaide this year, and we know in Jordan Dawson's good games, love the ball in his hands. Now, 100%. He gets some kickouts as well, so he'll get a bit of a flaw there.
Yep.
And the thing that has impressed me, MJ, when McGuinness went to him, what did he do in that Hawthorn game?
Tackle.
He tackled his backside off.
10 of them, I think it was.
So that's huge.
That's
and he could walk away. And if he's doing that with 10 tackles with his kickouts, it is very hard to be under 70. It's just almost near impossible. The second concern, though, is ill this week with gastro. We've seen a few players have that this year, and it hasn't been pretty. Not a pretty thing on many levels, but you're going to know as well. Like, if it is a laid out situation, unless you really wanted to go to a Fremantle or Richmond player tomorrow night, which I wouldn't think many would.
Look, we've lost him in Supercoach, maybe, but again, we're purely just addressing AFL fantasy at the moment. So the 145 game at the SCG gives us a look. Yeah,
it's probably Brayshaw, isn't it? If someone said, I want to finish my midfield or do something in the midfield,
totally,
maybe Brayshaw. But I think again, you'd want to have Mills, you'd want to have Miller, you'd want to have there's guys Steele, you'd want to have guys like that before. Especially at the price, Brayshaw's quite expensive. And I think as well, as we always say, you're sort of banking on a loss there. Very defensive move to take a Brayshaw now.
At this point of the season.
As good as he is. Again, maybe if you're in the top 100 and you want to just neutralise it, get it.
Different
Richmond's
story.
A handy matchup. I think he could go really well. At Marvel, he's played well at that stadium. So
he has.
Dawson, when you put in tag and ill, and if I'm thinking that's a 60, and this is a guy that's already got 2 scores, that if he puts a 60 in, that price is plummeting.
Yes.
It's already taken a bit of a hit. Now it's taken a hit off a massive price tag. Like, he was unbelievably expensive, MJ, just how well he was going. He was 880K.
Just a fortnight ago, yeah.
So a 76 and 85.
Fine. But
look at what he did before that, though. He was just
Mr. 115 plus, yeah.
So super impressive. So I think about that, and I look at the fixture.
That's the other piece, isn't it?
Carlton next week, tough. West Coast at home, hogging the ball. Now, North Melbourne at home, you'd like
good
that.
Matchup.
But again, he's going to get some opposition. He's going to get some attention. He's so good.
And then the final round is back to the point you made last moments ago.
It's just Port, MJ.
It's so denying of the football.
Yeah,
to their opposition.
I thought it was something they were doing. They did it against Melbourne, which really stood out earlier in the year. They played a game like, let's just, instead of making it a 120-minute game, let's just make it a 45-minute game. We're going to hold onto the ball, suck time away, and then unfortunately for them, they conceded 5 goals, I think, at the end of the second quarter.
Yeah.
And they just never had a chance because they just never had any intent to really score. But it seems like, a soccer team that 0-0, can we score in the 80th minute beyond and sneak a result?
Yes.
And it just sucks a lot of points up. It just sucks a lot of points up. It sucks a lot of time up. There's no real rush for them. So, and also, we know they're going to want to beat Adelaide.
Of course they will. Yeah, especially after the
and this is the guy. So I just think Dawson, target on his back, as good as he's been. I think there's a clear tag this week.
Yes, I
think
agree.
There's some attention against an extremely restrictive team in round 23.
Yes.
So if I'm penciling those in as let's just say conservatively, MJ, 75s for both of those games.
2 games. Yep. That means he needs to go 110 to 115 in the other 3
to match 100.
To go 100. So I think what we're talking about with Dawson is, now, I'm not opposed to
popular.
people.
And he's popular.
That's the other thing, especially in the top coaches. So I'm not opposed if coaches outside of Hewett, if you're a Hewett and a Kelly owner, you can't look at Dawson. But you can't look at him as a trade-in option. I agree with you in AFL fantasy. And if you're in the luxurious position that you've got either Hewett or no premium options to deal with, that could be one of the plays to really get aggressive and to make some moves, which is where a Redmond does become interesting. Now, I don't think he's a season play, which is where I was advocating, before when we kind of weren't talking about Dawson. He's a 1 or 2 week runner, get into your Tom Stewart. And then you look at someone like a Tom Stewart, based just purely on what he's done. He's going 100 for the year. He's got probably the best ceiling of all our defenders. And when he's back after this Port Adelaide game this week, which he misses, it's Bulldogs, St Kilda, Gold Coast, West Coast. So the Bulldogs.
Yeah, and there's a 44 in there, MJ, as well.
Correct.
That's the crazy thing. Like he's got a 44 that he was concussed in the first term.
That's right.
A price point of view, like we shouldn't be getting a player of his
ilk. So I think that's the play. If you're in the luxurious position, that's what I'd be looking at. Now, knowing there are some players I want to get to your perspective on soon, there is Darcy Cameron, as you mentioned, returning Grundy as early as next week. Rowan Marshall is ripe for the picking via Darcy Cameron, let alone anything else, with no Paddy Ryder for, let's call it, the season. If the Saints aren't in the finals picture in the last 2 weeks, which is a very likely scenario, there's nothing to gain to chuck him in there. Absolutely nothing to gain. Bailey Smith is going to be a really nice price in a week, as is Max Gawn, who a lot of people did trade out of. Again, maybe not so much in the limited trade formats, but certainly in AFL fantasy, top coaches moved off him. Before we come out of AFL fantasy and move to Dream Team and Supercoach for our Hewett owners, and we appreciate your patience if that's your preferred format, if you don't want to do a runner for a week or 2, and you can't get up to Doherty or Sinclair, but you just want to go, I just want a guy that I'm happy to have for 5 weeks. Is there any defenders you see in AFL fantasy that you go, this is the play? Or is it a best of a bunch of okay guys?
Oh, I think there's a guy like Bailey Dale, MJ, to me, jumps out. I think, it's a good little run of fixtures. I don't think there's anything too glaring. I don't see Melbourne, Geelong, Fremantle, GWS, maybe Hawthorn, but I think by then maybe a Caleb Daniel is back in the fray.
Yeah, sure.
And they can probably overpower a Hawthorn, but it doesn't matter as much. When Hawthorn used that McGuinness tag on Dawson, it was a game they wanted to win, and they did win. Whereas, at Bulldogs, the way the fixture's going and the ladder's shaping for them, that's their season,
they
potentially.
Go. Yeah.
So I think Bailey Dale, primary kick-in taker, like basically he's a walk-up 90 to 95. So, yes, you're off. Again, ideal world, you've got Tom Stewart, you get to Tom Stewart, these type of guys. But if you have to shop in that lower tier, I think Bailey Dale is super, super safe.
Yep.
There's guys that carry a lot of risk. Shannon Hearn, to me, we all know what he can do.
Upside.
We all know, I see Adam Simpson comes out and says that we want to try a few different things.
Yep.
I don't really know what the previous 6 weeks was. So I thought that might be trying some different things, but maybe you just continue to try different things. And Hearn, MJ, he is the guy, really, isn't he? Like,
he's that guy. Still.
Like, you look at what he does. Like, last 6 games he's played, low of 76, high of 119. Everything else is just peppering 85, 90, 95, 100. Like, it's very, very safe. It's very, very safe, but the body isn't safe. The team isn't safe. There's a lot of things like that. And again, you could say the flip side. If he announces his retirement, maybe he does get fed the footy for a couple. Like,
exactly.
There's things like that, but you'd have to be a really big risk taker, in my opinion.
Witherden would probably be in the exact same category too.
Yeah,
if you had confidence that he'd get named, there's your play.
You probably would fall into Witherden. He's a good one because you watch him play, and like we all know it, defending isn't his game.
No,
but I don't really know. You can't blame him. Like, he's always played that short kicking, sitting behind the play. Everything's really that's
he's always been that. Brisbane before.
He's going to be an efficient kick. Everything's short, sharp. Everything's long to a contest. There's nothing really that breaks the game open. There's nothing really daring, but like, what you get when you get him. So he's in and out of the team. I get that, but
you just can't go there. Crisp is safe but popular, so you're probably not going there again unless it's like you mentioned with Andy Brayshaw. You're playing a defensive maneuver.
Or you don't want to make a decision. You're sort of thinking to yourself, I don't want to go silly here. I don't like Bailey Dale. I don't like the risk with Hearn. You know what I want to do? I'm not sure. So I'm just going to get on track with the masses.
Bat. Yeah.
And we know Crisp, MJ, how many times when he's had this little dip, and again, I say dip, really, he's still
gone 90 in the last 5 in
the Giants game.
That's the difference.
So I think when you're buying at that price, especially in a DT, MJ, Jack Crisp is so cheap. I think that's your move where you're going, okay, this is safe. This is a guy that's going to give me...
The issue just becomes Port Adelaide next week, Sydney round 22, Carlton round 23. A good matchup against Melbourne if he's playing in that defensive areas as well as mid. So I think he's at Lloyd's an interesting one. 3 out of his last 4 tons in AF, but it does feel... you don't feel confident in it. You'd almost at that point, given the price is comparable, you're almost going, I'll take Crisp at that point.
I would think so, MJ. I would think so. I don't know.
For me, I just couldn't do it. So I think Hewett's an interesting one. He has to go in AF, and it becomes, as you mentioned, there's some safe options, popular and safe. There's some risky uniques that you could run for a week or two. But then the other element, as you mentioned, is if you've got other issues. Now, it might be rarer, guys like Kitty Coleman, maybe you held Lockie Whitfield, all that nature. We'll get to those and the Josh Kelly dilemma in a minute. But if you're a dream teamer and a super coach owner, the variable always comes down to about whether you trade or hold, because a back injury could be a 1 weeker, could be multiple weeks. We've seen that happen with Hewett already this year, where we thought it would just be something and it became something a little more elongated than that. It all comes down to, Kane, how many trades do you have left and what's your focus? That becomes, is it legal rankings? If it's rankings and you've got more than 3 trades left, I'd say go, pull the trigger and go and jump on somebody at that point. If you're in the top couple and you've got no cover and you're a chance at winning it, you would rather come inside the top few hundred and miss out than hold and hope. If it's the difference between a donut and having a go, you always have a go if you're in contention. You never know if you're going to get back into that position again, because there's good coaches that play the game. The only reason I would hold is you've got good cover, you really don't have many trades left, and you're only pulling the trigger on, you got 1 trade left.
And you're hoping he's back next week.
And you're hoping he's back next week.
Even if you got poor cover, right? If you got poor cover, that's
like a Karmas.
I think like a
Bazo.
I think Hoff in DT. You've got him in the midfield. He can swing back now, so you've got a straight swing. Yeah. With Hewett, now that might even give you the luxury, as you said, to bring on a Carmichael, a Cully, a few other things. But I think if you're down to 1 and this is going to take you to 0, you're thinking, okay, if I get a 40 here, there's probably going to be a week in the next 4 weeks that I do not have any cover.
There will be donuts.
And if you think Hewett is a 1 weeker,
you got to hold that,
surely. There will be people that miss more than that just by nature of there's so few games left. Even a minor injury is just usually season for a lot of teams. So I think you just back in your cover if you've got 1 trade left and think there's going to be a position in a few more weeks that's worse.
Well, what we've seen Clary miss a week, Josh Kelly miss a week. We've seen Whitfield now miss 2, Hewett. We've all lamented how many injuries there've been this year. While our stepping stones and our cows popped for the vast majority of the year, like Brody popped, Sicily's popped and delivered. Cornelio, for the most part of the year, has popped and delivered. English has popped and delivered, albeit missed some games. So we haven't been wasting trades with too many missed mid-year picks. We've burnt our trades with injuries. So I think that's some really fair advice. Let's then move into there is a smaller percentage, but a significant percentage of coaches that do have Josh Kelly. 18% in Dream Team, 12% in Supercoach. And AFL Fantasy, it's dropped about 4 or 5% since the concussion news came out. So that's down to about 8% of coaches across the formats have him through there. 550K in Supercoach, 827K in DT, 822 in AF. So you can get decent options. Probably without some cash on top of him, you can't get to your preferred best picks. But without telling people what to do with Kelly individually, what do you do if you've got both? How do you address that, Kane? Let's look for help those smaller percentage of coaches to how do you choose which premium in which line do you skimp on for the benefit of the others? What's the combination we should be looking at?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, MJ, because I think with these things, you've always got to start with the basis of, the people listening have no cash. If you've got more cash, great, you've got more options. But if you're looking at, Kelly and Hewett, we're just sitting shy of $800,000 spend per player.
Yeah.
Kelly's down to 822, Hewett's at 766. So I think immediately you start thinking, okay, what do I like here? What am I drawn to? Now, if you don't have Doherty or Sinclair in defense, you're probably naturally drawn there, aren't you? That's somewhere where you're going to be gravitating towards going, okay, that's the top of their line.
Mm-hmm.
They're blah, blah, blah. They're doing this, doing that. Then on the flip side, as we always say, it's always combinations. So what am I then getting in the midfield?
Yeah, are you skipping down to a 750K midfield?
Yeah, and again, at worst, you might only have 700. That gets really tough. If you're
getting to the Chad Warners, Jed Anderson, Dylan Shields, Jared Berries, Ollie Wines. Now, none of these are bad names, but
no, they're not.
If they're options that you're looking for a 5-week run, all of them, there's a level of hesitancy. They're at that price for a reason.
Yep. No, that's 100% right. So for me, I think you're not really loving that combination. Like, as much as you'd love a Doherty and a Sinclair,
you've got to skimp a bit, don't you?
If you're going
without cash in the bank,
if you're going at the low 700s, MJ, it just gets really, really challenging.
In the mids, there's some okay early 800s. You've got Keys, Anderson. Then you might be going up a little bit more. Petrarca just at 830. And probably then the top you might be able to get up to is Walsh at 838 and Bailey Smith at 850. That's probably about as far up as you can go if you've got no cash and you've got both to move on. Otherwise, you're now looking at the low 700s defenders, and it could be equally as unattractive an option.
Yeah, and that is always with this stuff the balancing act. What do you like? So I think some of the things you like in the midfield, like you mentioned, there's some guys that are really, really rolling. There's some guys that you go, okay, Sam Walsh, for 16K, I'm going to lose 16K. Now I'm spending about 750 on a defender, we went through some of the defenders before, but you're thinking about your Bailey Dales. You're thinking about your Jake Lloyds. You're right on the verge of a Nick Vostok. Now, if you want to really push it, you can start looking at a Nick Hind if you really want to take a bit more of a risk and back in some of that form. But for me, when I look at it, Bailey Dale feels very safe. I'm making 40K. Now I've got 860K to spend on the mid.
Yeah. And
I start thinking, okay, who are some of these guys that we can get? You're sort of scanning that price range. A Bailey Smith, 850. Now I'm getting someone top of the line in the forward line. I can swing him around.
Yeah.
Maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, now when I want to trade Darcy Cameron out, for example, now I've got the whole field at my disposal. Bailey Smith can go forward. Now I can get that premium mid.
Yeah.
And maybe next week, MJ, you can do a little downgrade. And now you can elevate yourself to, maybe you're getting up to the 900 range. Maybe getting up to the 920 range. And all of a sudden, Miller, Steele, Mills, all these guys come into play.
Correct.
I think the other one that is cheaper, and again, you'd need a bit of DPP to pull this off. I think Dylan Moore, I think we all see that role change is real.
Yeah, that's on.
Back-to-back weeks. We're very impressed. We've all got forwards that can swing into the midfield, put Dylan Moore in that forward line. You're making 14K on George Hewett.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about that, you're putting that on Josh Kelly's head now.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can do a bit with that, MJ. If you're in the 830 range, like you've got a bit of stuff that you can play with.
Yeah.
Do you love Noah Anderson? Do you love Davies Uniacke? Do you think, okay, I need to be a little bit safer than that? Even if you've got a couple K, you're getting Sam Walsh. You're getting Sam Walsh. So there's a few things like that. Maybe you can massage your team. Maybe you don't have that sort of flexibility, and that has to be a defender that's in that 800 sort of range. And then it probably does come down to, you are just short of a Doherty and a Sinclair, so maybe you have to go with a Redmond. But you're going to have to weigh those combinations up. I think if you're looking across the lines, I think if you can take on a pure forward, it's Dylan Moore.
Yep.
I think if you're shopping in the sub 850 midfield range, you're looking at your Walsh, your Bailey Smith.
Yep.
And in your defenders, well, again, if you've got a little bit of cash, you can probably take a Doherty and a Sinclair. You'll need what do you need, MG? You need about 50K to do it, but you might have enough money to get Doherty and Sinclair and Dylan Moore for Josh Kelly and Hewett. So
which isn't a bad combo.
No, I don't think it is a bad combo, but I always still think with these things, you can't be banking on hopping off straight away. Again, even if you go Redmond, you have to think to yourself, if I get stuck with Redmond for the rest of the year,
correct,
am I content with what that could look like?
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you probably would love to move him on to a Stewart. But again, if he keeps going the way he's going, maybe you move on a Sicily, maybe you move on a Short or something, Nick Dacos. But I think you have to have that expectation that you don't want, personally, to go on a Dangerfield, to go on these guys that you go, this is quite speculative. Now, you can play the game however you want, but I think with that budget of money you've got, you can get two guys that are either one's a real top liner, Doherty Sinclair, or even get up to a Miller.
Yep.
And then you're going to have to be a little bit more speculative. Maybe you have to take Nick Hind.
Yeah.
Maybe you have to, go with Christian Salem. Like there's going to be things like that you might have to do.
Yep.
But I think with that amount of money, you're getting two people that you can be rolling with for the rest of the year. And if carnage happens around you,
deal with it.
Two trains a lot sounds like a lot. But how much, again, you said at the time, stuff just keeps popping up. Like you can get stuck with them. And especially with Darcy Cameron ticking away, you don't want to be getting stuck with players and then have his role revert to primary forward, 30% ruck time. Like
and
we
giving
know
you
those
70s.
And that would be good. 70s would be good. So, and cash tumbling everywhere. So I think that's where I'd be getting two people I'm really, really happy with.
Yeah.
Now, do you always want to get, yes, you'd love to get Rory Laird and you'd love to get Doherty, but you're happy with them.
Who's got 250K in the bank and no issues to deal with?
That's the thing. Everyone's got issues, whether it's no cover, people on the field. So I would be getting 2 really good people. I think you've got plenty of options. And as I said, ideally, you don't want to be shopping in the back line if you can do some flexible. Again, Himmelberg would just be that perfect player, swinging back.
Yeah.
All those sort of things. But Dylan Moore, Bailey Smith up forward. I think those are 2 guys that if you need to complete the forward line or just even future-proof the forward line with the Darcy Cameron, you'd be pretty happy.
Yeah, that's a pretty good combination. If you're a dream team or a super coach and you own Josh Kelly, he's certainly had a quieter past couple of weeks than what he's done mostly through the year. But with the concussion, a late one, 12 day, not 12 game break. What are you doing? I've got some thoughts on Josh Kelly. I'm slightly biased around Josh Kelly, so I'll wave that flag quite happily. But what's your take around Josh before we move much further on?
MJ, he is a guy that if I had one trade, I would be very tempted if I had no cover to move him, because this Giants side as a collective, there's a lot of turbulence. They're one of only 2 clubs that have a vacant coaching position right now.
Correct.
I tend to think as well, Hopper came back in. We saw the centre bounces tumble. There's a lot of rumours about whether it's Hopper, Taranto, Bruin, even recent ones I saw about Lockie Whitfield, people wanting to leave and go elsewhere. And it's just, for a side that's not in finals mix, that always really worries me.
That becomes the concern, doesn't it?
And Josh Kelly is just a victim of his own success, really.
He's too good at too many things. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not one-dimensional like Hopper,
Green,
and Green. And I just think, he's good enough that he could do anything. Yes, he could just go back to his ways, but I'd be thinking, I can do something here. If you wait another week, for him to play another game, you're not going to be able to have this decision in a few weeks. Now, granted, you've got not many trades left, but
that's true.
I just think at that price tag, you can do some stuff. Now, yes, it's a shame that he lost 30 odd K last week.
Yep.
But there's still some stuff you can do.
There's a lot of options in no matter the format you play. You mentioned some of the names that you can look at just through there alone. It costs you, what, 20, 30K across all the formats to go up to a Sam Walsh, who I really like Walsh, not just because of his low ownership percentage, but also now as we get towards the final couple of weeks, who do they have? Adelaide next week, Brisbane the week after. They're just going to go head-to-head against them through there. Melbourne, they're just going to go head-to-head through there. And Collingwood, probably the easiest midfield matchup that you can get in terms of. So for me, it's like, it's got a ceiling historically, maybe not so much this year, but historically, the attention is still on Cripps because of it. And he's got a relatively good ownership and a really nice fixture. So for me, that's the one. Kelly is, I think you nailed it in the limited trades, is if you've got the opportunity, make the move. He's been very, very good this year. He's still ranked 13th overall in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team for total points. He's ranked 17th in Supercoach this year for total points. And I know some would go, man, he's been rubbish for me this year. It's like, really? Even off the back of his rubbish score last week, that's a bad pick. He's been phenomenal for coaches this year, and he's had really big quiet patches. That's how good he's actually been this year. So if Kelly's your worst pick of the year, you've had a pretty darn good year, is what I'd say to coaches. But that point is really valid. That midfield is volatile. So if you've got trades and no cover, there's a move. If you've got the opportunity to loophole, have a little bit of look and see at some options, you might not need to make that move. But for me, I think Kelly, as great as he is, because of the volatility and the position of where the team is on the ladder, I'm with you. It's a move if you can, but it's not disastrous if you get stuck with him to this point. Before we wrap up the episode, we've alluded to these 4 names a little bit. We want to finish it up soon because people are getting close to locking in their teams. Darcy Cameron. We want to talk about him in a sec. Rowan Marshall. Maybe they're 1 in 2. We should link them together because really they are so closely linked for people. Bailey Smith and Max Gawn. Gawn is the ruckman we all want to have if we don't have him. Plain and simple. But outside of a handful of games across formats, he's not really destroyed your year. There's a couple, but not heaps. Bailey Smith is the forward we all want, but he's not got the monster ceiling. He's still very, very good. But the 130s aren't there at the moment. And does, as you mentioned, teams getting out of finals contention, if the Bulldogs drift in a fortnight, does he become a priority or not? Rowan Marshall is screamingly obvious to anybody that needs a ruckman or a forward. Cheap, solo. We put it out the stats online. I think it was earlier in the week across the coaches panel socials handle for everyone to see. And the stats are very similar across previous seasons, but with Ryder this year, he's going 75.8 in Supercoach. Without Ryder, he's going 112.8. Then over in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, 78.5 with Ryder, 99.8 without Ryder. So he's the one probably screaming at people, Kane, that we're looking at to try to get this idea of do we, don't we, do we, don't we? And then you probably could link the two together in the sense of Darcy Cameron's right there with him. And so that's where the attraction for Ryder pops is. I see Grundy coming. I see Ryder out. Marshall's my guy. That's the move. Is it this week and next week? A plain and simple, if you're in the luxurious position, can we jump off Cameron early, quote unquote, to go to Marshall now? Is that like just one of the most screamingly obvious trades that coaches should be making if they're Darcy Cameron owners and don't have other issues to address?
I think if you got that position, MJ, you'd be seriously looking at it. I think the only caveat we have is Tom Campbell going to be in this team? Because we know that's their desired setup. They love Marshall, Ryder. We know that they're very successful when the two of them play.
Yes.
But what happens to Rowan Marshall? And the funny thing is, Marshall's been playing great footy
as a forward
with Ryder in the team, and he's been scoring really well. There's something about West Coast, though, that's it's not as easy as you think. When I initially saw that matchup, I was like, that's a good matchup. And I started to think about it, and I thought, oh, yeah, I remember that Gawn matchup against West Coast when he was in red-hot form. It's just they're that sort of team. Again, possessive footy. There's Marshall's had a little bit of, flu-like symptoms, it sounds like. He sounds like he's all good.
It's fine, but yeah.
And I think he's probably one of those picks that if he's traveling, you'd have to have a lot of confidence in him because the bar is quite low. And he always has that flexibility that if, Gawn and English really get going and you want them in your ruck line, you can have Marshall in the forward line. That's not too bad. We know Ryder, you've got, sounds like at least 3 games, maybe 4, if not the rest of the season.
Yep.
And I feel like it's going to be funny, MJ. I feel like if you've got forced trades, just say the Hewett and Kelly obvious one, you probably don't mind that. Now, again, you could get Marshall in that situation with DPP, but I feel like a lot of people will go, not the worst thing just to let me have another look at Marshall with potentially if Campbell is in the team. If he's not in the team, I think you'd feel a bit more confident, but
totally.
It's just been a funny week. It's over in West Coast. You'd think the Saints would win and, get themselves right in contention with the 8 still. But sometimes it's funny with these ones that feel so obvious. Now, the thing that helps Marshall is his price is trending upwards. So it's not like you wait a week and you get him cheaper. I think that's not going to be the case with the way his price is sitting because he's been so good. But he's also not really a bargain either. Like, I look at a Dylan Moore for a comparable price and I'm more interested there. I think, do I really need Marshall in the ruck line when I do think that Gawn and English aren't too far away from getting going?
Yeah.
And it's not like he's a 650K player anymore. Like he's actually quite pricey. So I'd rather chase the upside of a Dylan Moore. But again, if you do need a ruck, I see the appeal. It's just, never ideal when you've missed a day of training. Things are going around at the moment with COVID.
Yeah.
It's a long flight. There's just all these little things that make you worry. So I think in a way, if you can't bring in a forward, it's almost handy for you in a way. You just go, yeah, I'm just doing something else and I'll address it next week. But
yeah,
I don't think there's enough going around to steer you away from Marshall. Like he is playing well. You read out the numbers. Without Ryder, he's brilliant, especially if there's no Tom Campbell.
Yeah.
If there is Tom Campbell, maybe you have that slight concern because Campbell really is.
Maybe some of the ceiling drops a bit, but not.
Yeah, but again, he's got a ceiling, Marshall. So it's a tricky one. You'd love it just to be he's clean bill of health, flying. Campbell's not there.
Yeah.
But I couldn't steer people out of it.
No.
Anyway, I just feel like you're in that luxury position now. Would you rather a Bailey Smith for 100K more? Would you rather a Dylan Moore
for a comparable price?
What do you sort of need? Like if it's something that you're going Darcy Cameron though, and it's in the ruck line, I think he is the one. If you're going in your ruck line, Cameron down, I think he's the one. Whereas some people
and you can't get up to Gawn. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even if you wanted to let Gawn have another week and just see that price come down, I think Marshall is, he's a 90-95 guy, sort of at worst with this role of being the sole ruck as a forward. So if you're doing that, you're in the mix and you should be fine.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout. Those other names are really interesting. Gawn is, like I said, he's been very good at patches this year, but also if you haven't held him, he's not destroyed your year. And that is an interesting piece of the puzzle.
The other thing of the puzzle, MJ, that really interests me, and this is a guy that I think we both got on quite early, and we've been quite fortunate, is Mitch Duncan. Now,
I'd like to talk about him.
No, that was looking, I wouldn't say super painful, but it was somewhat painful because of when a lot of people brought him in, it was, around 6 or 7.
Picked him over a Parker type of move.
Yeah, I picked him over a Mills. A lot of people that was just, and it hurt. And then we got a little bit of luck. Tom Stewart got himself a report, and Duncan was okay, but he didn't really have much about him, did he, MJ? He was very sort of low 90s, high 80s, just sort of meandering. You couldn't get rid of him, but you weren't fist pumping on a Monday about him and yourself.
I'm a Mitch Duncan, no.
And then, we've had 3 games of a suspended Tom Stewart, and he's gone at 120.
Yep.
So I think now they play Port this week.
Yeah, that's the challenging one.
So obviously there's too many bigger fish to fry, but I start thinking if there's someone I really like in the forward line beyond that, maybe it is a Bailey Smith.
Yep.
I would not be opposed to jumping off Mitch Duncan because I just don't see it continuing with him and Stewart together. It just hasn't gone that way.
Statistically, it's not that way. So in the 4 games he's played without Tom Stewart this year, and this is not including the concussion game either, by the way. So this is just pure in and out. He's going at 88 in Dream Team this year in fantasy with Tom Stewart. Now, again, that does include the concussion game where he did a good score too. In AFL fantasy,
there was something in that, MJ.
There was something in that.
He got a lot of easy kicks when he went 100%. Down.
And he's going at 111 without Tom Stewart. So we're seeing a 23 points per game increase in AFL fantasy, but it's actually probably closer to 25, 28 if you really want to get pure Stewart on the ground and playing and available through their super coach. Similar numbers, not as big of an impact, but similar numbers. 85 in the 12 games he's played with Stewart, 101 in the 4 games he hasn't. You include that concussion impacted game. Again, it moves from currently it's about 15 points per game more in his favor up to 18, 19, 20 points per game. You're right. It's not a great matchup this week. And maybe for coaches that are in luxurious positions, it's probably very AFL fantasy because Dream Teamers and super coaches, if you've got him, Again, unless you've got a nice bank of trades, you're just going to have to cop it. You've enjoyed the benefit a few nice weeks. You're probably just going 5 more weeks, fine. But in AFL fantasy, if it's just Hewett is your issue, maybe these names that you mentioned, Marshall, Moore, maybe a week early, but even a Bailey Smith, to make the move if you've got no other issues. If you're like, I've got cover everywhere, I've got Carmichael, I've got myself a Parnell still rolling through, a Saligo. These are the names you got. I got cover, because that's all you need your cows doing now is just playing as cover and not really generating too much cash. Well, it's about 22K in AFL fantasy to go from Duncan to Bailey Smith this week.
Yeah, that's why, MJ, for me, it's you're waiting the week.
Yeah.
Now, you don't love the fact that Smith will play against Geelong that week.
Yeah.
But maybe, again, you can do something else and you can hold. But just something, again, as someone who's owned Duncan for the bulk of the season,
Yep.
As I said, you see it. Once Stewart's not on the field, those easy kicks backwards, those big mark tallies that he gets, like, it's insane. Like, it's just, you take away someone as good as Tom Stewart, who's such a good interceptor and ball user.
Yeah.
Not that Geelong don't have other good ball users, but those two are they're just unbelievable. So when you take one out, it seems like Stewart's the one that gets those marks, but he also has that intercept mark game. So
correct.
You just really see it when he goes, like he pops massive, Tom Stewart.
Yeah.
So just something for me, again, as someone who's very happy, and I see the 81 break even, I think, it's probably catching out Mitch Duncan at about 8:30, sideways to Bailey Smith, and then
get a Rowan Marshall.
I just think these are the type of moves that, that's sort of what AF's about this time of year.
Yeah,
you want to get yourself in a luxurious position as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And then next week we're talking about 4 games.
Yeah.
So if Stewart has, Duncan, has a 85, Dylan Moore can go 105, or, Bailey Smith can go 105. These are the little gaps we're trying to create. And that's always the thing you're managing. We spoke about offline last week. I was balancing, do I trade Cameron or Lipinski? I sort of liked the matchup of Cameron. Lipinski goes bang.
Yeah.
Thought I liked the matchup of Keys. Wasn't his type of game. That's the hard thing about this time of year, is you're going to get a lot of egg on your face, because you're going to have to make moves because you have the trades to make.
Yes.
And you got to and all you can do is back your research.
Correct.
You can't be angry at a poor score, because poor scores happen. And big pop games happen too for players that you've been trying to get rid of for months. It's 100%. Just how it is. But I think that's probably that real final frontier. If you can see things like a Mitch Duncan early, if you can see a Darcy Cameron early, if you can sense, especially in those teams out of the 8 or not in contention, sometimes silly things happen. We know you're good at this role, but what about this guy in there? And you play a different role. Like, that's why the names you mentioned, Walsh, Bailey Smith. Now, Dylan Moore's just had the role change. So I think for me, it's the Tom Mitchells and the O'Mearas and these guys that are like, okay, well, I'm not really going to get that same run with, am I? Whereas, a Redmond, that looks like Essendon's found something getting the ball through him.
In his hands, yeah.
And they want to finish the season strong, whereas there's some other teams like the Giants that you just go, well, they're just trying everything. They're just trying everything and anything. So really fascinating time, challenging time. As I said, I think there'll be some people that go, I didn't know what to do this week. And part of me is like, well, I've got Hewett and Kelly now. That makes it a little bit easier. Just worry about those 2 things. Don't try to pick the Sicily, Short, Dawson. Yeah,
injuries can sometimes be a blessing in AF.
Or you just go, well, I couldn't do anything about that. So we just process it and move on a little bit better. But really interesting week. And there'll be some people that say, you know what, I'll fix my bench cover, cash up. And that is always a play.
That is always a play.
If you're really not happy, no point getting stuck with someone that could be a 70, 80 guy. If you've got a decent bench that you can maybe get out of 50, and it sets you up to get that big dog. We even say, even 4 weeks, if they can put 15, 20 points on that other upgrade target, across 4 weeks, that's 60 points. And we know in this situation, MJ, 60 points can be, I wanted to trade X or Y. Like, that's how crazy some of these calls it. If someone pops a 150 and someone gets a tagged 60,
it's a 100-point play.
It can be one decision in that final week or so. It's probably why AF comes to the fore at this time of year. We know Supercoach, that's the game. That we just have to live with those rules. DT the same. But AF, we do have to get creative, and we do have to look at the fixture and we do have to look at the taggers and all these.
Yeah, it becomes a bit more daily fantasy-esque.
It's very daily fantasy, MJ.
Through there. So players that play that and are used to that, or draft coaches that are used to running matchups and running through waiver wire.
Draft gets you really, really good at that, because typically, most leagues, you've probably got minimum one or two really good bench players, or at least players that you're weighing up.
Yeah.
And we know how volatile some of those, if you've got a 65 averaging defender, it's not 65s every week, I'll tell you that.
No.
It can be a lot of 30s and 40s and then the 100, and often the 100s when they're on the pine. So
yeah, 100%.
You're right. It is daily fantasy, and you have to look at it that way. It can't just be, I want the top.
No.
Why do you want the top? Are they going to keep doing it? Do they have matchups? Is there tags? Because one tag, we're not talking about for the season. Who is the best players for 5 games?
That's all. You're just looking for 5-game, 2-game, few game runners to get you there. Man, even though there's only a couple of issues that coaches are dealing with, there's a lot to process through for fantasy coaches as we get to really this critical time. If you're league focused, you could be battling for finals, and it's these kind of 50-50 calls, unique captaincy decisions that make your year. Or if your rankings, you're desperately looking around the top couple of dozen, the top couple of hundred to see where are opportunities that I can make. And opportunities aren't just gone full crazy unique, like getting a Mason Redwin, which I'm doing, by the way, now for fantasy, because I don't care. So I'm going to have some fun with that in that position via Hewett. But it's also then not getting certain popular guys. So that is a lot to process and think. Kane, you've been an absolute champion for us, not just on this episode, but right throughout the year, mate. Thank you as always, mate.
Nah, thank you, MJ. Appreciate all your work.
If you want to go and check out any of these other podcasts, you can go and check them out wherever you're streaming and downloaded this podcast content from. You can keep in touch with us across social media. At Coaches Panel is pretty much the handle you need for every single social media that we're on. Not TikTok. I'm too old for that nonsense. We're not on that nonsense. Or you can just join our Patreon supporter group. There's a bunch of different tiers and rewards and incredible stuff that's coming, not just through these last couple of weeks through the preseason of the season, but heading into your preseason of 2023. The Keeper League tiers from Kane and I, that is back. Louis got some exciting things lined up for you that we can't wait to share with you. And then, all coming back again to do it for the 2023 fantasy footy season. Good luck. 5 weeks left to go. We can't wait to chat with you again next week here at the Coaches Panel. We wish you a heck of luck entering what could be a very important round for you.